What's up everyone, it's Sebastian Soliński, and today we're going to have a look at JavaScript objects. We'll have a look at the way they can be defined and pros and cons of each approach. As this is purely client-based exercise, meaning obviously we are working with JavaScript and a browser, although JavaScript obviously these days can also be used on a server. However, this exercise is purely based on the client side, so all you need in order to be able to obviously follow this course is just your favorite text editor and the web browser. To start with, let's prepare the HTML and JavaScript files, which we're going to be using during this exercise. So in the root of our project, create a new HTML file, call it whatever you need. I'm going to call it simply index. And we've got a basic structure of the page. The first thing I'm going to do is create a style tag with the type text CSS, and I'm just going to add some very default standard formatting here. We start with the body, and for the body we're going to define text align center. Then we're going to go for font family, and that's going to be simply Arial, sans serif, and then font size, so that we can see things clearly, we're going to define as 21 pixels. After this, we're going to create another definition for address field, and we're going to go for width 33%. Then we go for margin 0 and auto, and the last thing will be text align to the left. And that's all we need here inside of the style tag. In the body, we're going to create a div with the ID address field, and that's pretty much everything. One last thing is just a script with the source. We're gonna go for js app.js. We don't have this file, so if we now save our index.html, create a new directory inside of the root of our project called JS. Inside of this JS folder, we're going to create a new JavaScript file, which is called app for application, obviously. Okay, our index.html can now be closed. Let's put some title here as well. Exercise. Or just, I don't know. Yeah, let's keep it this way. Let's save the file and go back to our app.js file. One thing important to understand about JavaScript object is that in JavaScript, almost everything is an object. The string is an object, an array is an object, function is an object, math is an object, and so on. But what we're going to be focusing on in this course are the objects which have properties and methods. In JavaScript, we don't have classes. To create an object, we simply use function. The easiest way to demonstrate it is by an example. So what we're going to start with, we create the first object called function person, and we're going to put two arguments, full name, and the second one will be address array. So this is our first object. Inside of this object, we're going to create the first private property. Objects in JavaScript have only private and public properties. The private one is simply defined by using var and then providing it the name. For this specific one, we're going to call it this object equals this. We're going to use this specific private property of this object later on to call it from within the private method. I'll show you in just a second how it's going to work. Now, if we want to create a public property, what we're doing inside of the object is to use this keyword and then give it a name, say full name, and that's going to be taking the value of one of the attributes, which is the first one, full name. So here you can see the difference. This is a private property, and here's the public property. What's the difference between the two? Private properties, the same way as in any other languages, cannot be called from outside of the class object itself. Full name, on the other hand, obviously can be used. You can use the person instance and then call this property from outside of the object. Next public property will be this address, equals null by default. And then we have the first private method. Again, methods are also functions, so function. And I'm going to be using underscores the same way as we use in many other programming environments. Underscores for private, public, which is already obviously already should use this underscore here for this object if it's a private. For private, we're going to be using underscores. For public, obviously, we won't. So the first one will be called parse address. And what this one is going to do is simply use underscore this object dot address. We're assigning the value to our public property. We're using this object because if I was about to use this, that's not going to work, unfortunately. So that's why I've created this private property here to reference the object itself. So if we go back and use this object dot address equals, and what this is going to equal is address array, and we're going to join all of these elements inside of this array using the BR, which is basically HTML way of creating the new line. So this is our first private property. The next one will be simply calling it. Basically, we are triggering this property here. So whenever this object is instantiated, this method will automatically be executed because we're calling on the following line, basically. So obviously, this property address will automatically have all these items inside of this array joined and assigned to our address property. Then we have this dot get full address equals, and then get address and semicolon. I'll explain this in just a second. Just to let you know, this parse address here works more or less like a constructor in any other programming language, basically, because executed when the object is instantiated. Basically, we calling this function here. It's practically, it's not exactly the same because obviously constructors got slightly different obviously functionality within the class, but here in JavaScript, this is how you would call basically the methods which you want to trigger straight away. Okay, so get full address here because has got get address assigned to it, and get address is another function which will be defined outside of this person object. So function get address and then two curly brackets. And what we do here, we define a variable called full address, and we start with the opening paragraph tag, just the opening, then semicolon, then on a new line, we concatenate it with plus equals. I'm just going to move it so that equals symbols are all on the same line. Then we go for this full name. Why are we using actually this if we haven't got any properties inside of this object, which is basically just a standard function? This is because this specific function will be called from within the object which has this property defined. So that's why we can use it this way. Now we continue with full address, then plus equals. Next thing, we're going to create a new line. So BR, semicolon, then again full address, concatenation with this dot address, and then full address, again concatenation, this time with a closing paragraph tag, and the last thing we're going to do is return our full address. And that's everything. So now this specific function is assigned to our get full address, making a method out of obviously this, which we might have thought initially to be just a property. Now this get full address becomes a method of our person object, which obviously returns the full address, which is a concatenation of our two properties here. Now, in order to use our object, what we need to do is first create the new instance. So var, let's call it Sebastian, for instance, equals, and in very similar manner as you do with, let's say, PHP language, you simply use new, and then we use person, passing the arguments to this object, which are full name, which will be Sebastian Solinski, and then comma, an array of the address items, which might be, for instance, 56 London Road, then comma, let's say Bristol, comma, Somerset for region, then comma, another item in array would be BR, let's say 11 Q5QR, then comma again, and country United Kingdom. So that's one object. Then I'm going to create another one, which will be called Nathan equals new person again. And we're going to have here Nathan Sulinski. And again, array of address objects. Let's put 13 Bridge Road, comma, Brighton, comma, East Sussex, then comma, BR 11. Yeah, let's do the same postcode. It doesn't really matter. They are all made up anyway. AA and a comma, United Kingdom. Okay, so we've got two objects, Sebastian and Nathan. What we're going to do next is to append them to our container on a page. First of all, we're going to create a new variable called container, and we'll find the element to which we want to append the result. We're going for document and then get element by ID, and we provide in the ID of the element, which is address field. Now we're going for container dot inner HTML, which is basically what we want inside of the element. The HTML obviously input, which will be Sebastian, and we're going for get full address, and that's all. That's how we call it. Now if I copy this entire thing, paste it on a new line, and now I'm just going to replace Sebastian with Nathan, which is our second object. And if we scroll up here, as you may remember, obviously get full address method calls the get address one, and obviously that concatenates everything, wraps it with the paragraph, and then we return the value. So that should now work. I'm going to open the browser and we're going to test it. Now, if you've been watching closely, obviously, you might have already realized that inside of our index.html, rather than source, I put style, which obviously causes the fact that nothing renders in the browser. So for script, we obviously have to have a source. Now, if I've changed it to source to link to our JavaScript files, obviously this whatever we've rendered is now displayed on the page, but it only displays the second one, and the reason being is because we haven't concatenated this. We actually overwritten the inner HTML here. So for the second one, we simply need to use plus, and now if we refresh the page, you can see we've got the first one and the second one right underneath. Now, if we go back to our index.html, we can also increase the width of our address field tag to display a little bit more. Let's make it 53. Now it looks a little bit better. There we go. So as you can see, our object is working fine. Now let's have a look at how we can actually get rid of this function and put it directly inside of the object, which is practically pretty straightforward, because all we have to do is basically, rather than have it get address, let me just scroll up a little bit. Rather than actually calling the external function, we can simply use the function and now put all the code inside of this anonymous function. Actually, it's not anonymous because we give it a name here. It's our internal method here, obviously, which is a public one because it calls this dot, and then we've got a name of the method. Inside of this method, what we need to do is basically copy whatever we had in getAddress function, paste it in our newly created method, and we can now get rid of this getAddress function altogether. And that's what our entire object look like now. We only have one object within the global scope, which obviously is better than having two of them. Let's again preview it in a browser. And if I refresh the page, you can see everything works exactly the same way as it was before. As much as this approach works, there's one major downside to it. Every time we create a new instance of the object, all of the properties and methods of this object are copied to memory. Meaning if we have one instance, it's all fine, but if we need to use the same object several times within the application, and if this specific object has, let's say, more than just two methods as we've got here, obviously, that may become a little bit of a problem. There are better ways of creating objects, and we're going to be exploring them in the following videos.